Hello, my name is Pandit Wright. It is June 10th, 2021, and I will be conducting an virtual oral history narrative interview with Dr. Marion Hines on behalf of the DC Oral History Collaborative and Asbury United Methodist Church. Dr. Hines is at her home in Northwest Washington, DC. She will be narrating parts of her life story, including a deep connection to Asbury, the District of Columbia, and a rich and meaningful career as an educator and author. A native Washingtonian who attended DC public schools, Marion Hines graduated from Spingarn High School in 1957 and went on to receive a bachelor's degree and an MA in French from Howard University. At Georgetown, she earned a master's degree and PhD in applied linguistics and has since pursued a wide range of educational opportunities. Dr. Hines has traveled to 48 countries on 6 continents and would have been to Antarctica by now had not circumstances outside of her control prevented this. She speaks fluent French and has survival skills in German. Dr. Hines grew up in Asbury United Methodist Church, joining the Wesleyan Choir at age 17. After choosing teaching from the limited choices open to women at that time, particularly women of color, she began her career in 1963 by joining DCPS as a French teacher at Stewart Junior High School, now known as Stewart Hobson Middle School on Capitol Hill. Dr. Hines, thank you for agreeing to share your observations and life experiences. I hope you will enjoy revisiting some of these memories, and I certainly look forward to hearing them.
Thank you.
You are welcome. In your book, 200 Years of Public Education in the Nation's Capital, 1804 to 2014, you describe yourself as a perennial, lifelong learner and autodidact. What I would like to do, if we could just start talking about particularly languages, how you develop your love for languages and international culture. Did it start with your father?
Languages started with the schools, with the public schools. I was at a 7th grade student in French, and the French continued. Like culture and travel and international, that started with my father, because he had this humor and this wide open space kind of concept and fearlessness. The whole world was his picnic basket, and he and he just made the most of it. And when he was away on business, travel, whatever, once we were all a family, because he was not American born, he would get these letters and he would say, "Oh, I'm swimming like a rock," and all. So it was just fun. It was something, and he was always in North America or South America, wherever. It was all his bailiwick. And when he came home in Easter, where we had the divided city, and you would stay on your part of Washington and the others would stay on their part of Washington. When Daddy was here, whole Washington was the bailiwick. We went everywhere, and there was no tension. So that is really, in terms of the feeling and comfort and presence and demand, you might say, to be, that comes from my father.
So your father came here from Barbados in 1933 by himself, and then established himself and family here in Washington, D.C.
I'm presuming that from what he said, but primarily from some documents, because you would see the ship, we were doing a family history thing, and I was trying to get specifics on my father, but he's been dead since the 50s. So I would see him on these ship records, and there he was, but I saw him on there more than once. So it's obvious that he'd been going back and forth, and his work carried him that way. So that was fun too. And the thing that was fun was that even in those records, he was still Daddy. I knew it was him because it said the man, they described him on the what do we call it, the ship log. It has a fly bite on his nose, and that's what Daddy had. A big old horse fly bit him, and he had this mark on his, and he had $50 in his pocket, and that's the way Daddy was saying. So I said, "Oh, here he is." So yes, that's that freedom of movement and not going apologetically. It's his world. That was the that was the feeling. And I think people in languages and cultures, they have to have that same feeling.
That the world is your oyster. Talk about the experience of getting your first job as a French teacher. What part of that did you have to push for? Or was it more destiny, do you think?
Destiny. It was just pure destiny. And it was unbelievable when I think about it after the fact. My first job was at Stewart Junior High, and I came to Stewart directly from the graduate program at Howard. So you know how that is. When you come out of an academic setting and then you go into the real world of the classroom, often there is no match. You know, you've got to go through all kinds of horrors before you finally get your act together. But when I went to the school, it was a neighborhood school. The kids were bright. They were Caucasian and Negro and Chinese. They were smart and alert. The parents were like that. It was a small school. It's been around since about 1924. They had a really strong music program. They had a good sports program. They had May Day, which reminded me of the old German influences during the 40s and 30s and 40s. Academic, and they would leap in the maypole. It was a good experience, so that as a brand new teacher, I could not have landed in a better setting.
Black and white students, or?
Black, white, and Chinese. Now, those are the dominant groups.
This was 1963, the year that JFK was assassinated. Did that have any impact that you remember on your classroom?
It had, not on my classroom per se, on the school. We had a lot of, these are junior high school kids, but they, as 7th graders and 8th graders and 9th graders, at that time, they were far more mature than 9th graders and so on, and now going into who are starting in the senior high school. So that you had some elements of rebellion that was elements coming from groups in the neighborhood, and were telling them to not salute the flag and to not obey, and when you left the school in the middle of the evening, when you were finished with your classes and so on, you see all these pamphlets and so on the paper teaching rebellion and disobey and all of that stuff that was being instigated in that community. It was really bad. Children refusing to stand for the flag. And here I am, brand new teacher, and I know that I can't tolerate this, because if I cannot manage the classroom in such a way that it's like your country, then you may as well go on out with the kids. So
who were the instigators? Who were the instigators? Who were the instigators?
People in the community who never, some of the literature would say something about communism. And some of this, there would just be some of them were, there's a film that talked about the Red Book. You would see some of these pamphlets that seem to be torn from something that would have been the Red Book. And these are instructions to revolt and to resist and to disobey. And these are 7th and 8th and 9th graders, so that the teacher was sorely put to maintain not just control, because it's not about control, it's about knowing who you are and maintaining that concept, and a strong concept. And if you're going to act up like a 7th grader, but not like a somebody's going to overturn the government. So that was an interesting challenge, to have all of that coming at you in my first year anyway, first year of instruction. And I'm sure we did that. You just have to take strong stances. You have to make them understand why you were taking that stance, and understood what theirs is. So they were very strong and independent. So for example, in saluting the flag, because we were still doing that in these days, if you refused to salute the flag, I invited them to stand in the hall. And then when we finished saluting the flag, then they could come back in, because they weren't offended and we certainly weren't. So they did it, It was this crazy period. And all of that was just a kind of betrayal on the part of adult groups. For what purpose, I'm not quite sure, except that the papers that have been found lying in the street or all up in the neighborhood tended to be, they touted communism.
I understand. You've talked about life as a river of action.
I do.
which goes more onto your destiny, philosophy, moving that river along. After Stewart, you went to Woodrow Wilson High School, and
Yes.
there you added journalism and French culture to your teaching portfolio. I would like to know what made you feel confident teaching those things. Had you been to France at that point?
You know, that's one of the miracles when we talked about, I didn't get to talk about it because my mind is racing, but my first year teaching was a miracle year. That's something that came in 63. In 64, I received an NDEA grant, National Defense Education Act, and that sent certain teachers wherever they had to go in order to learn whatever they wanted to learn. Since I was in languages, I've spent the first year in a master's program at Howard University in music, and I worked the lab and did all those kinds of things. The second year, I was in France. I was in and spent the summer there. So when I came back for my second year of instruction, j'étais française.
What year are we? What year are we here?
Huh?
What year are we in that point?
When I came back for the second year was September 64.
Okay.
So my first year was 63, 1 year. I went to the NDA Institute, and then the second year began. I already had that French and all that attitude and all that under my belt, and it was really continuous. It was what I'd already been experiencing abstractly, and what you were talking about earlier on autodidactic form, because I've been doing that in my graduate courses and so on, creating that ambiance. What is it that creates a learning environment? So that's how it all just sort of segued. So it was very easy, very comfortable.
And what got you over to Wilson? Were you seeking a move at that time?
I just found myself reassigned there.
I understand.
Uh-huh.
Now, in terms of the things that you are known for, it is the philosophy you developed that led to a practical approach to teaching languages, and that approach being studied by others was considered groundbreaking. But you had already implemented these sorts of philosophies. Can you talk about some of your teaching strategies for language and what you wanted to achieve with your students?
Well, the method that I used was the one that really ended up being the method that they were working on in various campuses across the country. In order to learn to use a language, you had to be emotional. It had to be something that gave you pleasure or gave you pain or was going to be useful. Make love. I found in my early travels, the students who had the language first, best, and never lost it were those who had their little boyfriends and little girlfriends over there. And they would go to the cafe, and they could go there with zero French, but before the summer was over, they were absolutely fluent. So,
how did that come about?
Through emotions. The emotional content of an experience is what carries us in our language learning, and carries us in everything, but I'm only talking about languages. The emotional content will carry you. It can carry you, you will get the language. Now it's a language of love, or whether it's a language of hate, whether it's something that you can do to earn money, write poetry. There's an emotional content there that comes from the person himself. And so that is really, really fun. So as a teacher, I'm looking at simulated activities or real activities that bring that emotion into play. And so that you meet somebody at a party, and you tell them they have the language forms. How do they say hello, and how are you doing, where are you from, and but you have that stuff, the words. But the other part of the story, which is often left out, is body language. And that's as much a part of the communication act. And so when we got the body language in there right away, it just soared. They were those kids, they were male and female, because often males don't like to hear themselves speak French and so on. But when they were, what are you doing, hand jiving and making dates and meeting up for pizza and so on, the things that they normally do and give them great pleasure, and they had the linguistic skills, they had the language content to do that. It was just wonderful, and they never forget it.
In French.
Forget it.
In French.
It embeds, it burns onto your emotional DNA, and they go on, and that was the fun part. Whereas before, language in the traditional sense of what they call grammar translation, what you were learning were lists, and lists has no meaning. It's just a list. If you got good memory, if you have good memory recall, then you remember some of the lists. Some people with really powerful memory banks, they're the ones that get the big A's and A pluses. They could go on, but they still couldn't get out. As I told you before, they still couldn't get out the door because the memory bank was just the list. They were just static elements that they memorized, but they had no.
You were bringing language to life.
To
for
life,
these
had to be used in life, yeah.
I understand. Now, we talked about a deep range of positions that you held in education. At least that's what I mentioned in my introduction. Because you have done it all. You've been from the classroom, policy, research, teaching. You've been from middle school to university, and you've been in both minority and primarily majority serving institutions. What comparisons did you draw between some of these institutions?
As a teacher or as a student?
As a person.
As a person, Howard University was a phenomenal experience because they in my day, when I was there, they did not make it easier for you. It was abstract, it was ancient, these old references and references, the books that we used. It was highly emotional, and you were highly on your own. Unless maybe if your parents knew somebody on the faculty, or if you knew somebody, but basically that was the autodidactic part of that. You had to figure it out for yourself to a large extent. You could be guaranteed in that time that you were getting excellent instruction. There were brilliant people who were publishing all the time, but that difficulty was there. There were none of these loving, what do you call those people who, all right, Miss Hines, now here's what you do. Let me tell you how to do it. When I went to Georgetown, it's a powerful institution, but it was 15 times easier to get through than Howard, because the support beams were all there, and they were friendly, and but maybe it was easy because I'd already been to Howard. That's so it's hard to know. I just see it all as miraculous. That you see all of these things as something being engineered beyond my own mindset. So those were my major. I did the master's and doctorate at Georgetown, master's and BA at Howard. So those were the trial grounds, and they were very successful in helping me reach where I needed to be. As a student, Howard was as difficult to, as a teacher at Howard was very difficult, because it's not just that it was Howard, but that's age level. And people have already decided that they're going to be this or that, and they need an A or a B in this or that. And they'll say to you, you're having an interview and discussion with them, and they say, well, Dr. Hines, I can't accept the B. Dr. Hines, I can't accept a C. That kind of thing. So that's illogical. I can't deal with those kinds of, you can't cater to them because they're illogical. They don't work in the scheme of things where you demonstrate capacity and involvement and understanding and the larger picture and independence. Those are qualities that they must demonstrate, and they demonstrate that when in the success or lack of success in their work. So
is that different from Howard to Georgetown or to the University of Kentucky, for that matter, where you later taught?
Howard and Kentucky were more alike at that point. Georgetown, I never taught at Georgetown, so I did not see it, but I'm sure it went on because people are people, and they try to negotiate the way businessmen try to get Japan to buy Coca-Cola, whatever, give them whatever they want, and then they buy their Coca-Cola and everything is fair. I never taught a class at Georgetown. I was a student there for a number of years, but I taught at Kentucky and I taught at Howard, and see that pattern.
I understand. Now, throughout your career, the travel and all your experiences, you have said Asbury was a constant. How so?
Asbury has always, Asbury is 18, what is it, 18, oh my goodness, I'm losing the year of my own church, 1836. So that's before me, but the research covers it. And then all the way up, it has always put youth as a primacy. It's always, that has always been a touchstone. It may have been because of the Sunday school programs. And in those days, when Asbury was first formed, along with a lot of the churches, the Sunday school was answering the needs of kids to learn to go to school, because in our city, there was no public school for Negroes before 1970, 71. So you had a private school, or you had somebody to teach you, depending upon your resources, but they were not invited to the public schools. They could pay taxes. The parents paid taxes for the private schools, public schools, but the kids could not go. And then so that you had that dichotomy that was, of course, totally unacceptable.
But your elementary school, I'm sorry, I'm going to take you back a little bit. What elementary school were you at? You were at a public school, though.
Yes, I was, but not at that age. I went to Morgan. I finished Morgan Elementary. That was an excellent. See, Morgan was what they called a demonstration school. So you saw the best practices. You saw best practices, and the teachers were always on the forefront. You know, these are the best in second grade, and great music and theater and drama and so on. So Morgan over there at Calorama Road was one of those demonstration schools. We had Morgan, I think there's one called Moss Elementary. We had several, up this way, I can't remember the schools right now because many of them they've renamed them. But we had demonstration schools all over the city, and Morgan was one.
And Black kids and white kids attended together.
Well, Morgan had been white because it was in that part of Washington over there at Calorama, and so on. So when they took over Morgan, it was still a Negro school, because there's still no integration of schools. That was done in the 20s, I think, late 20s, like 21, 29. I think Morgan became integrate. We took Negro students around 1929, but only, they didn't integrate it.
I understand.
But there's still the high quality of teaching, the commitment of parents, the kids being they were like the ones I described earlier, very smart, very alert, just like the kids at Stewart. But this was elementary school. And so it was working with those kids, being a part of that community, was like being in a community of junior high school kids. They were very sophisticated, very progressive, very independent.
So if I take you back to what you were saying about Asbury and Sunday school and helping to fulfill educational goals as well, can we go back to that connection?
Mm-hmm. So what do you want me, all right, well, Asbury's Sunday school program was excellent. It was run like a school, like a true school. And so you had progression from level to level. You had very excellent teachers. You had ceremonies for moving on from one level to the other. Their leadership was very important at Asbury, and so our kids came out naturally, they just leaders, and that was the focus, and being focused on leadership, as I interpret it, and of course on being good people, being, you know, God to the children, and doing all of that, so they could have they had the skills, they had character, they had focus, and they also had independence. And that's what they saw in Morgan, at Asbury. So I think that that's it. You have another part to that question?
No, I was just trying to sort of get started on what Asbury has meant to you. I know that your first pastor was Dr. Robert Moten Williams. Can you talk about anyone in your youth growing up in the church that had influence on you, or something they may have said to you as a young person that you carried on with you?
Not really. The adults the adults in these various communities that I remember really impacting my decision making were in the schools. Not ministers, but the music did. And so I was part of the music program as I finished high school, solidly part of that. But I've been in the music program in the various schools, and in junior elementary school, one of the teachers there, Edna Johnson, Edna Johnson, she sent me to join the choir, and I went there. So that I really think of her. She's the one that got you into music, and you were just sitting there, and she said, "Marion, you go do so and so." So from that, I launched my music in choir and singing and solo and so on. That was launched by that particular teacher by sending me to go to be in the choir in the school, in the Morgan School. Then, so when I'm in the Asbury, I did not sing in any little children's choir. My first singing experience at Asbury was in the Wesleyan choir at age 17.
What was that like? What was it like to be in the choir? I know you've said that, where you lived, you were able to walk to Asbury or hop on a bus. And you've said the church was where everything happened. I want to talk about that, but just on that, being a 17-year-old in choir, were you there because you wanted to be there or because the adults had directed you to join that choir?
I just sort of landed there, you might say, like a drone, but once I got there, it was wonderful because the music was wonderful. Music in the choir in Asbury in those days and still today is not showmanship, it is worship. And so it reaches all of the little cavities and everything becomes music and becomes part of the experience. So that's why it takes on an entirely different presence in the spirit than maybe whatever you're doing in school. We talked to people in the choir and going back to their early experiences in music, and we're pretty much the same. They did it in school. They learned to read music and so on. But when you were in that Asbury group, music was part of worship. And so it was always at in those early days, very high level, because it's like the cathedrals. If you want to celebrate God, you want to please him, you build a beautiful cathedral and you bring your best stuff, whatever that is, you bring your best stuff to that cathedral. So when you look at Notre Dame and so on, you can't look at those places without thinking of the love and the sacrifice on part of several people, not everybody necessarily, but that's how they were there. The committees, this village would bring rocks, this village would bring sand, and somebody else would bring wood, and those are all bases and albums. So it's that kind of thing. It's an entirely different experience and it's very satisfying.
What other things were going on in the church?
Well, in the 60s, we were, I'm in Asbury since childhood. So you go from the 40s on up. I'm aware of what's going on more during the 50s, 60s when you're a teenager. So we had youth fellowship, and we had brilliant, thoughtful, loving leadership from people like Evelyn Gray, who's a Washingtonian, and she's unparalleled. She's just a phenomenal woman and phenomenal teacher, phenomenal leader. Her students, the people that worked with the kids that she supervised, or you should get in a little car. She had a lot of attitude, and she'd beep you all over Washington, D.C., and you'd find yourself in some Muslim temple, you'd find yourself here. She was just a phenomenal woman, and therefore you had phenomenal experiences. She was, I think, for many of us of my age and older, that's a major linchpin. Evelyn Thomas Gray, she married and became Gray. She was a true teacher. And and she was so that gave you a sensitivity to everything, to the public life, to the other churches and other religions. We would visit the various synagogues and so forth, and we meet the people. We weren't just there looking at them, interacting with the youngsters. It was the best, one of the best learning experiences. And yet at the same time on her own, she'd be reading a volume like this and you wonder, what is Evelyn reading now? So she was just a wonderful, wonderful teacher, a wonderful
And
teacher.
how much were your siblings involved in your Asbury experience? Did
Same as
everybody
mine.
do the same kinds of things?
Yeah.
Can you talk about them? I know you have the two sisters. Who would be going with you to Asbury on Sunday? Did you go by yourself or did you
No,
go as a
we went
unit?
to, in those days, we went together because you walked or you took the bus down, you know, because everything was close. I think the person who made the most important contribution was Marjorie. She's our senior, you know, the oldest lady. She sang like a bird, but her voice is not just a pretty voice, but her voice inspired people and calmed them, it soothed them. And it was spiritual. All of the music program there, that was the impact. That was the impact. It was not entertainment. It was not Broadway. It was not some big show. It was always about making that connection, sending the music, you know, on up. She was the best. In our book, in this little thing, music, and you go through the round robin of the choir members, she's constantly mentioned as one of their favorite voices, Marjorie. She had a major impact. Not only did she sing with Asbury, but she sang in she sang for Unity people. She sang wherever there was a request, she sang at the teas, whatever anybody said, we really want to hear Margie sing. So she would go, and you wouldn't pay her anything unless it's just something you wanted to do. Even marriages, I don't know if those marriages held on because she sang or not, but
were your parents in the choir as well?
My mother sang in the choir, it seems, according to records, discovered that during the book. She had already said that she had been in the choir, but I wasn't quite sure until I came across somebody else who said, oh yes, I stood right next to her. The mother, the great musician, singing, she loved it. But it was worship. And she would get on the piano here and she could remember something that she had learned to play 1,000 years ago. And she'd play with the same gusto that she had played when she was a girl. Her sisters and her father would, what do you call it? And they would go around in various little communities in nearby, maybe 12 miles or so, and singing and compete. So but her continuation with the Wesleyan choir was very short. She may have sung with the choir 2 or 3 years or so, but her singing background was years. You know, so that, you know, that's how that goes. She was very lovely voice, lovely alto voice. And she just, well, again, it was about worship. She would just get on the piano. I heard this, but I don't want to go through anything. No, not on this tape. You rake that off now. But anyway.
She grew up in North Carolina.
That piano and sing and be completely at peace. You see,
she grew up in North Carolina, so that's where her musical experience was, and she brought it with her. Let's go back to the Wesleyan Choir then. You recently published a book. Can you talk to us? I want to talk about that book. I just want to say it is a beautiful history of the Wesleyan Choir with Asbury, complete with pictures and indexes, and really a wonderful reference for anyone who wants to understand the Asbury Church at a period of time, the music and the musicians. Can you speak with us about what called you to write this book, and what the legacy that you wish this book to continue?
This book and the one that precede and those that are coming up, all are part of an effort to document important things that happened in this city. It's the story about people and things that people tend not to remember, or they don't report, or they don't record. And so those reader 30 years later or 40 years later, or even right then and there, will say, well, these things never happened. They say that that's not who they are. My belief is, and that's why I wrote this and all these histories, that's the major project I'm going through, is if you don't record your history, as far as anybody's concerned, you have no history. That has always bothered me. And the choir is a major historical phenomenon. Women educators in the District of Columbia Public Schools is a major cultural phenomenon. And the other book that I'm working on, which is on language education in the District of Columbia broad-based, is a major cultural phenomenon. what is happening and what happens naturally, of course, is when you have people of competing desires, or they want to diminish this and make this look like more, or to borrow what is and then claim it, as like they do the old gold digs, you know. So Peter was working the gold mine here, but the mule kicked him and killed him. So now this is my mine. And there is no reference to Peter who was kicked dead by the mule. Well, if you publish it and get it in the Library of Congress, that's my objective, then as long as that institution exists, then the history is there too. So to write it and just put it in my room would not serve any purpose. It has to go so that it says this is their history. So that's why we have the indices, we have all of those kinds of things, so that it's not just something that's coming off the top of my head or my fading memory, but has been researched through dealing with people and dealing with other sources. I think that your history, I think that every family should maintain, write its history. I just think that is I don't know why we can't think of it as an obligation, but I think it should. Children are lost today. They don't know who they are. And these families, these scrambled families that we're having today are really just too much, because kids don't know who they are. They don't know. We had children, why do I have blue eyes? Well, so we said, well, that's so-and-so. So what we had to do is really write that story and show those blue eyes and track it. And then you do a little study of Mendel's laws and so on, you might understand it better, but they have to know. They have to know. When they don't know, you just don't know what to do. I think it's a responsibility.
So with Wesleyan, and we'll talk more about the other publications as well. What was your process for pulling all of that together? How did you even go about starting and getting all those photographs and historical sketches?
That was the main process, just collecting, because in a lot of organizations like the churches and other things, was carelessness with documentation. So but we had recently, one of our ministers, Reverend Hudson, had established what's called the history room, or sections like the archives. So that was consulted. That was consulted, and going online a lot to deal in tracking, like a detective. You go here, and that may give me that. My own files were extensive, because I always had planned to do it. I had very extensive files on Asbury. And then we had a really lucky break with somebody even before that, who, Charles Jackson, who wrote it all down, the church and the ministers and all these little stories. And they were just great stories. They gave some footage in terms of that everyday history. Of course, we have in Lovely Lane Museum, we have histories of ministers and what they did in that church. That's always there. People, because that's part of your church ministry, but that is not music. And there was nothing that dealt with, I've not seen anything that really treats the music other than Charles Jackson in this book.
From reading the book, it looks like people really were interested in being part of this process. In particular, I refer to a conversation that you actually recorded, where you had several different choir members, and of course our Minister of Music, Everett Williams. What do you think the benefit just to the people themselves of participating in this project?
Well, there were 17 of us, and we wanted them to tell the story of music at Asbury. The music of Asbury is the music of these individuals. So if they give us their history, as well as, what was their musical life like prior to Asbury, and even as they were serving the Wesleyan Choir, those stories define the church, define music, they explain it. It explains why there's a sound that seems to be constant in the group. And then when you start, well, why is it we always sound like that? We hear these other choirs and they sound like this, but when we hear our choir, we sound like that. Then you start looking at these people and you get their history, and you really find that in many cases, they're coming off the same DNA. They're coming off the same biological form. And there are many of them are family members way back. Some of the members in the choir can go all the way back, track their roots back to that first group. our first choir in 1936, 22 voices. And you can, and some of those people who are still surviving and recently passed, go right back to that. So you have this melding of sound that is unique to the church. When those people are no longer there, then we're going to get something else, because unless we still draw on the family root. But that that round table called it, we asked everybody the same question, and in every case, people had a question to answer, except for one where everybody did not answer. We asked, do you get highly emotional? When do you get highly emotional singing? And some won't admit being highly emotional. So there you go. But so out of 17, only 9 answered. I thought that was very interesting, answered the question. But it was very comforting in a strange kind of way to see the simplicity and the good memories that people have of their musical experience, the people who had touched their lives and permanently, because they're one girl speaks of Leontine Price, who had spoken so nicely to her and given her some ideas about how to support the voice, and Leontine Price tells them, "Oh, you sing like a lark from then on," So they had, and then we have the guy who played in Louis Armstrong's band. And then we have another guy who played with a lot of, I can't think of them now because I wasn't prepared to remember the groups, but they played in these groups that travel all over the country. They've always been musicians, most of them. Hardly anybody in that 17 group had not had a really interesting life in music. But then if you look at the 400 and some names listed in the book, a lot where we have or do not have the names, that kind of background information, some of them automatically from other indicators that they were in music. So our people seem to, music is the soul. It is nurturing the soul and sustaining you. And it sustains the church. And that's the ministry of the church. The music of our church is the minister and the music. They go together.
How would you define the Wesleyan choir style then? When you say one group sounds this way, another group has a particular DNA, how would you define Wesleyan's style?
The Wesleyan choir sound that we've been talking about for a number of years has a kind of, it's hard to describe it. See, if my sister, she could tell you. It's a kind of lusciousness about the sound. It's warm and no stridency. As soon as you hear that, you know that sound is not from the choir. This is some guest and you can hear these things like that. Even if it's a well-trained voice, that sound is not one that goes with the sound of Asbury. It's a very warm sound. It wraps itself around you in a kind of way. The articulation is clear, except when we have bedtime, and it tends to be low and low on the register. We don't sing high, and maybe that's the choice of music or whatever. But if it gets real high, we've had ministers, we've had directors of music who just bring it on down. Let me write the script. You say change that. So it's that. It's a sound that I guess that I would equate to a good day and a good day, just a very good day and a very spiritual, spirited day. And it feels good. It supports people. It makes them feel good. They relax. And then they hear. The thing is that sound does not turn them off. They listen and they hear and they're renewed and refurbished and revitalized because of that's the sound. And they look for it. And after a service, people who've been in the church for 1,000 years, but we have almost a new group, they'll say, "Oh, that was the sound. You all sounded like old." And it's just so funny, but it is so true. It's a sound.
How much time do you have to devote to being a good choir member?
Well, and that's a good question as we're talking about. To be in our choir, minimally they expect you to be there. It's not really designed. Well, I can only tell you what we do. We have attendance. The choir members are expected to be there for rehearsals, and we have spent as much as, we've had patterns of 2 or 3 days a week, Thursday and then a Saturday or Monday or Wednesday. They had various, but you see, our people, that is probably probably a weakness or peculiarity, because the folks in the choir work. They've always worked. Even in 1836, they worked. So and I guess maybe that's, the choir is more about worship and service than it is about performing. You could hardly reach, be that kind of group with the schedules that people keep. You've got to be there. You're going to be there 4 or 5 hours a night, 2, 3 or 4 times a week. With no way anybody's going to do that, because they work. Many of them have jobs that require that they show up unexpectedly, and they have children. So that what we have done is we've had special rehearsals led by individuals. People, and they're mentioned in the book. People take care of themselves. You buy their pitch pipe, depending on who the director is. I'm telling you, it's really quite interesting. That's why we had to tell the story, because it's funny. It is absolutely funny when somebody comes in like Marcellus Breach. I mean, what he was expecting was not, what they had not been doing. All the other directors.
He was the choir director. I'm sorry, he was the director. Mr. Breach was the director.
Yes, he was the director. He came in 71. He followed a minister who had been there 25 years and became sick and so on. But Marcellus was a different kind of man. He did not. Everybody would sing. Everybody would sing solo if he needed to. So now there you go. He's going to call on you, and they want you to be ready to do the third voice or the opening piece and so on. And you've never sung a solo. So what they all did is buy pitch pipes, and they got somebody in the choir, or they paid somebody to work with them to work them through that and to get rid of the nerves, because they had never stood up in that church. And that's one of the weirdest feelings you want, to stand up in front of Asbury congregation and try to sing. A choir church that music is central. They will listen to you and they won't walk out on you, but you know that because you're in there too, and you probably walk out on yourself. So you have that kind of edginess that promotes good music. There's a certain amount of edginess that promotes excellence, and that's the issue. As I'm trying to get ready. So Marcellus would have everybody sing, whereas if minister before that would only have his starists sing, and everybody else is just singing. So that when Faxon's people, when he left his position, and all those beautifully trained voices were no more, then you come to this group. We had still some of those beautifully trained voices, but Marcellus said, oh no, everybody sings. So that really was funny. That was really, really funny. You've never seen such nervousness and nausea and the whole bag.
Can you recall a specific story about choir life that we may not know?
A specific story about choir life? Not right offhand. What do you mean? What do you have in mind?
Talk more about even the person who had to stand up and do a solo and hadn't been prepared to do it. Do you remember anything particularly about an occasion like that?
Those stories like that, if you were assigned that, like if you got your assignment Saturday, between Saturday and Sunday, you were working somewhere. You got somebody. They would get Marjorie. She could make you sing even if you didn't. We had people who wanted to sing, you know where their voices. They would work with Joe Baker, who could, they had their own private teachers. That's why we list them. And these are the people that people leaned on, and they could always make it happen for you. Joy and Calvin and fellow over at what's that high school over there?
Ellington?
Yes, Ellington. They are used to working with people. That's what they do. Their voice, they sing, and they sing all over, and they sing in other countries and so on. And then you had some who were really professional musicians, and they were, being in Washington was a decided advantage. It was an incredible advantage. So that if you could identify them, if you knew them, or if somebody had introduced you to them, you had access to some major music quality, but you also had it within your own group, because many of the people in the choir at one time or another, teachers of music, they would work you up, get together before the choir actually started singing. It's been a musical entity, as I said before, since the beginning. And so the thing that was the biggest difference was here you were vulnerable. When Marcellus came on, you were vulnerable. You knew there was a good chance you were going to be asked to sing, and you did not want to tell the man, oh no, I don't sing. There's no way that was going to happen, because he would go home with you and get on your piano, and before you left that, you were singing.
Did that ever happen to you?
Well, he would work with alls like that, but those I never. Yeah, I guess he did, because he always says that I was a stubborn kind of thing. But you know, I'm not too keen on being on the spotlight, as you probably have figured out by now. I can do just as well on that back seat in the corner. I'm happy there. You know, nobody's messing with me.
Right, I understand. So from age 17 in Wesleyan Choir until today, obviously a lot of change. Can you highlight for us 2 or 3 of the big changes that have happened over the years? Maybe not even just in the choir, but in Asbury that come to mind.
Big changes have been the insertion we've had a little bit of what they call gospel or whatever, but that has creeped more into, not into our singing, as we have always sung everything. There was gospel, oratorios, we've always had a classical, a broad span, you know, but when you have groups that do exclusively something like that, or if they move left and right, which is okay, you know, that kind of waving thing. Oh, that's what some of the earlier directors would have gone off. They were just, what do you rock? So you have these cultural shifts that we've lived through for 180 some years, and but somehow or another, being in Asbury and really being in Asbury, worshiping there, you have your children there, it tempers it to some extent, so that it still looks like Asbury, but the voices are not the same. That's what the big difference is. The sound, I'll say the traditional sound of the Wesleyan choir is not the traditional sound of the other choirs, but they're not, right now there are just 3, but we've had times when we've had octets and other smaller groups that sang on call during like a particular ritual going on, that they wanted to give them a chance to sing. We've had the children sing, but then the church choir is the Wesleyan choir, and then the other choirs are also worship choirs, but they're not the dominant choir. So that those additional groups and their repertoire have brought in some new things. And one of the main things that has changed things is use of instruments like drums, and that would come from youth. The youth, they'd bring every drum they had, and it was just really incredible effort to get all the big thing and the middle thing and the tin thing, and they would be very good, you know. But that, I think, it shook up a lot of folks, because it was not part of the history, it's not part of the tradition. But then in doing this book and trying to say, well, now what is the experience of Asbury in music? You see just about every musician under the sun, almost, and they've been there, and they've been played by guest musicians or by members of the church itself. So that was one of the purposes to show to anybody who would read it, at least put it on the record, that this is who we are. You know, we have the timpanist, and we have the guitar, and we have the trombone, and boy, when they come, they can really play these instruments. There's just the musicianship that's available to us in Washington, and teaching is something incredible. Of course, it's just
who is the most prominent musician you can think of that has sung at Asbury?
Sung? I won't say the most prominent. We've had a lot of them. But one of them, I'm having a lot of trouble with names right now, losing the names, but
you are not alone.
It's just really bad. Leontine Price sang there before she really was Leontine Price. And she sang, and We've had a lot
Can you
of,
tell us about that? How did you happen to get her at the church?
because she came because Mark Fax was our director, and she was in the music program at Howard. So Mark Fax wrote an opera, and she had a starring role. So she sang the starring role as a student, but then she transitioned right from that into a professional. And of course, I think there's one or two of the activities that her music came back to us at Howard. So
Just by way of background, Mark Fax was music director at Asbury at the time, and also, what was his title at Howard at the time?
He was professor of music, and I think when Dean Lawson left, he became director of the School of Music, assistant director, something like that. When Dean Lawson passed and they changed the School of Music, then these jobs those kinds of positions were generally phased out. But then they recently reinstalled the music program at that level, but it's a arts program, not just music. So we had Mark Fax, who's a composer, very well respected. We sang his music in the library, in the art gallery, in different places. Just a very active man, and he is responsible for us knowing so many of the really fine musicians and reviewers or critics that we do, because of the nature of them using the fact that he was creating and he was using his choir as the vocal instrument.
Was Wesleyan Choir ever a traveling choir?
Well, no more than any church choir. You know, we went to sing. We would only sing near Baltimore to accompany the minister, or Virginia. The old church records, the old records in the old newspapers show Asbury just boom, boom, they were just all over town but everybody was doing that, you know, and they wanted that choir because the choir was, and when you read the news, I have in the book, in the very back, we have all these articles collected from newspapers of that day in the 1890s and 70s and 80s, so on. You get these reviews of the choir. And that was the tenor of the day, just like my mother her family going all over North Carolina singing. It's just what people did. And this choir would do that. So they did get around. And
What year did that stop?
I think it's really sort of stopped when we still go. We still go. We don't, our choir, the Wesleyan choir, except for those very early days, it never did a lot of traveling because we were a worship group. Our first place was in the choir Sunday morning. So that was the responsibility. If we went in those days, and even now, we're generally going later in the afternoon at 3 o'clock because the minister is he's speaking. We would not just go and perform. We didn't do that. It was generally in response to the minister's request that we accompany him. And then if it's a big activity, then the choir would have prepared a big program. Sometimes we would go to another church because the church was having, the church choir or the church, host church or choir was having a major celebration, 100 years of existence or whatever, and then they would ask the choir to come. It's that kind of thing. We didn't do a lot of traveling because our primary place was right there at Asbury.
So let's talk about this past year of COVID. What impact can you talk about that COVID had on the choir and on the church itself?
It's been very interesting. You know, it has really probably led to a major addition and expansion of our ministry, because when we had the online services, people were listening in from all over the country, and you almost have another audience and people who are beginning to affiliate, and they're saying that they're Asburyans, even though they're in California, whatever. That's very exciting. So that as we plan now, as the church plans now, that is part of the plan, that you create all the supports and understanding that those are Asburyans out there in California. And our music leader, Everett Williams, has been very creative. It's taken a little time to figure out what that should be, but how do you work it so that the music is there? Because we have people simply say, I'm not going back in that place. Now with COVID-19, I'm going to stay in and I'll listen to you on the radio or whatever. But then you have others who will say they're following the guidelines. And so the early efforts, we put one person there on the front row, then another one 6 feet, then another 6 feet, and so forth. And then maybe a couple up there, and that didn't work. It was not good. Even earlier still, they only had one person singing. Then everybody said, you need music, because it's a music church. You've got to make that happen. If you don't make it happen, then it's just got to happen. So what I had noticed, and we've been doing this ever since the COVID, so it's 2 years now, more or less. And what I don't know that he did it, but it seems it's what it looks like to me, because that's the way the sound comes. People on the balconies are shaped like a big horn, like a horn. You know how the horn, the sound comes out of the cavity of the horn. And that's how their voices, so their voices, you can hear that old sound we were talking about. And even though it's like a chorale, so that instead of you can hide behind everybody else's voice, you can't. It is you. But if it's all together and it's in that horn, before it goes any further, it is already blended. And it's been a wonderful experience in terms of providing people what for many people, the most important thing they get out of service is their music. For some people, it's the most important thing is the minister's sermon, but for a whole lot of others, and we've done surveys to that fact, it's the music. So once Everett had figured out how to place people, 10 voices, it's just 10 voices in that, before maybe one person singing by herself, or 8 across, but it was not musical. So I don't know where it comes from. I didn't ask him, I just know that soon he had made that adjustment, and now people are right there making the same kind of, oh, it was wonderful, it sounds like old times, and they have that little thing that I don't know how to do, that little chat thing on the side. They write it, oh, it's wonderful, chat. But so that was good. But I think to say, in terms of change, I think that this online service, and that's going to make a big difference. I think it's going to be an big addition to the choir. We go back full scale in September, and because that's when the city opens again, officially September 31, whatever it may have been. So it'll be interesting to see. But still, even at that, there are several people who are holding off because they're afraid. They didn't get the shots, or for some reason or other, they can't get the shots, and then you have people who are there who haven't had shots. So there are a lot of issues that are not even musical issues
that are going to happen. In terms of this past year, it is certainly a year that will never be forgotten in history. In addition to COVID, we had George Floyd, we had the Black Lives Matter sign in the street. Were you able to go down and look at that sign, or have you ever been down to where that happened?
I have not been specifically to see the sign, because I see it on television. It's very, very near a church, and because it's right there in front of me. But I have not been there to see it since I've seen it on TV. And during all of that disturbance, we just stayed where we just looked at through the media, and I don't tend to, the only thing I've only been to one or two or three, maybe 2 or 3 real public events, well, more than that, really. I love parades, I like happy unions. I like peaceful unions. I don't want all this anger and terror, and I find I can fight another way. I don't have to go there and scream and turn purple. So, so in terms of political, when Martin Luther King came and he had this wonderful speech, Asbury is right up the street. So when he spoke, all those people, many just came to Asbury. We were there hosting folks and getting them someplace to lie down and rest, getting them there's something practical and meaningful and helpful. That's why the church is there. I mean, why it can serve. So we did that, and I participated in that. We also have an ongoing, what they call, I guess, reconciliation kind of thing with Foundry, because our church comes out of Foundry. So they don't have these big sessions in Foundry, and choirs sing and so on. I don't participate in those either. I will read about it, but I'm not I'm a teacher. I like to deal with ideas, and I like to help think through it and get others to think through it. But I don't that heat. Now the one time that one of the biggest and probably the largest and one of the most wonderful experiences is when Obama was president, and the crowds were incredible. As anybody who's there, I don't know if you were there, it was incredible. And it was so peaceful. People were, that to me is what you can do. You know, that was wonderful. There'd be no way that I would not have been involved in that. But then when you go in there and children piled on their shoulders, and people were not just close, they were into each other's bodies, because they were jammed in there, and they were so happy and peaceful. There was no discordant note. I don't see, that to me is something to do, to add to the great, and of course the Martin Luther King speech was there too for that. Because
you were talking about the inauguration of President
Obama's
Obama.
inauguration. That was incredible. That was an incredible, it was because it's right down the street from Asbury. And some people, we said in this book, we said Asbury can feed X amount 200 people, and we can do in this, and we're also a resting place, because that's exactly, I just love it. Those are the concepts. I think it's important, regardless of whatever is going on, is to know where and who you are, and be consistent with that, and do not try to be everybody, and not try to speak all the languages, know all of the, you have to be who you are, and find your peace there.
If you think about the idea of Asbury as a church and as an institution, what do you think Asbury will be remembered as a place in history, its place in history? What do you think about that?
Well, I don't know, its place in history. You have to read all 185 years, 184 years in history. And it's a collection through time of some people who made brilliant contributions in their field, especially in government. We've had a lot of very fine people in modest government positions, but in a position nonetheless to make a difference. There's several of them, and there's some of them are still active in the church, even though they may have retired. But they're on important boards, and they are voice of sanity and reason. That's who they are. We also have very strong people from medicine, and they're well established and sought after. And we have very strong enough, not the medicine, government, and law. But,
are there any names that you would like to share?
Well, not really, because I'm so bad on names, but we have words. I come back around on that. You want to plug it in if you can, because there are people like Emerson Williams' father, Emerson Williams, and Clive Callender. Clive Callender is a major search with the replacement of the livers, and once he doesn't ever really retire, but he's expanded that operation so much so that when people get that what is it called? Get the new liver or whatever.
Transplant.
There's a girl that he likes to talk Marion up. She comes out from home, she's completely healed. She still has that liver. She's completely restored and on her feet and jubilant and healthy. And that's part of what that kind of thing does. So he's working with the liver transplants through Howard University. And we have Emerson Williams and other families. They would bring the wagons in, the health wagons, so that you could get your heart, I don't know what they call them, wagons, but anyway, whatever they were. They bring them, they could get their heart checked and their blood pressure checked and get recommendations from doctors. So we have a number of doctors, and they just, they took care of people, and then they would make referrals, and then they could go to a hospital and get it further checked out. Those are the it's a service church. And it's just like the music. Everything is about service and making things better for people. And that comes out of its history of, 1836, our first choir director, who is McCoy, that was exactly what he did in the choir. The church needed a choir so that the church could worship. He pulled that together. It's the orientation. We don't get a lot of people who have a whole lot of public profile. It's kind of, I don't know if you can do both of those very well. You can have a big public profile, but then how much time are you able to actually give of the same quality to within inside the church? So those are the things that we look at. I look at anyway. I don't know if anybody else looks at them, but you look at them because one way or the other, you're going to have to shave off something. You're going to have to make a decision. And our people, ones that you know about, they're the ones who shave off the public profile, and they do what they have to do in the church, and then the church reaches into the community. So they carry weight, not just their weight, they carry the weight of the whole church. And so we have people like, oh dear, I can't remember names.
Don't worry about the names.
It's just
I think you're getting a
on.
point across about that. You have mentioned to me before that Asbury as a church, when you were coming up, that the church was teaching people how to behave, how to act as young people, as children.
I did that?
You did that.
What did I say?
You were saying that when I asked you how through all of your travel and your work and everything else, that you still came back to Asbury.
Oh, yes.
And you mentioned that Asbury was part of your DNA and the kind of role that Asbury had played. Can you talk about that a bit?
That's it. Well, that was when I mentioned it, I was talking about our Sunday school program in the Asbury, along with a lot of the churches in the area, had grants from government grants and from these various organizations to teach Negroes, because they were blocked from the schools, and there were no schools opening, no public schools for Negroes. So we had these school programs, and Howard Asbury had one too. It had the program at Asbury, and we also had the school that Francis Asbury established. Francis Asbury, who established Methodism in America, one of the large pieces of his work was schooling, so that because Negroes and slaves, and so it was worth your life to try to bring education to them, just as it was to bring language. So they would our early Sunday, the Sunday school program is older than the church. That started in Asbury in 1829, and so they would, among the African Americans, Negroes in the city, those Sunday school programs focused on everything, on language, on grammar, on things the kinds of skills that they would need to progress through society. And that's what the focus was. They had music, of course, and all the other things. Whereas in the Caucasian or in the white churches, the focus was on the Bible. So the Negro churches and the Asbury churches focus on helping students be strong, to thrive, to be able to figure it out where they're going, to know, be able to write, be able to compute, to be able to have a power to communicate and to carry that with them into their work and their lives. So that's what I mean by behaving, not how to be a good person, but how to live and be in the spirit of God and the spirit that the church proposed and support. And we would get little dictionaries, and we get little Bibles, and we were kids. They would always support the youth. It was amazing thing. You could always think about it. And so when the kids would grow up and get to be very successful, they would always come back to Asbury wherever they were, and they'd make a speech, and they get so excited because this was a product of Asbury. They learned independence, they learned honor, they learned how to handle language, they learned how to lead. That was number one. The main thing that I think, and this is my opinion about the leadership, but that's what I saw. When I saw these guys come back, they were leaders, and that's important.
Where have the youth gone in Asbury?
The old youth What do you mean where they have the youth? If there were, because these the youth have gone with their families. What has happened with what was it, 1960s, or the end of the war, and then you had gentrification and all that kind of stuff, and then the Beltway, all that. Much of that activity stayed in Maryland and Virginia. They didn't come back into the city. And that's the clearest statement. We have the family, the parents, grandparents, they're still at Asbury because that's home. But their children, those that are children, many of them are in their own communities with their kids in their neighborhood and at the mall and these multi-million churches with 4,000 members and all that kind of stuff. And but it's not a unique phenomenon in our church. It's just a nationalist, and it's unfortunate. But I blame churches. I blame the church for not doing a better job. If you're just doing it because you're helping the parents take care of their kids while you go to church, keep them quiet, keep them amused, and that's what that is. But if the expectation that the church has a role to help shape that person, then you don't lose them to the incidents of a beltway. You put the resources in place, you put the leadership in place, you put your prayers and your thinking and your genius in place to reach those people, make sure they get back to the extent that you can. Even if you put your own sub-transit system in place, pick up at such and such a place at such and such a time, and I think that's my dream for youngsters at Asbury, that we slowly and quietly and carefully reclaim the youth. And I think we have to reclaim them on ideas and texture of life, and we have to invest in transportation and invest and bring them in and bring them back and let them bathe in ideas and greatness and knowledge and sort of forget all about how they, matter of fact, they may as well, because the malls are disappearing, aren't they?
They are. You have mentioned that word retirement in as it related to someone else a little while ago. I want to ask you, what is your definition of retired, and are you ever going to do that?
I don't know about a definition. I'm no longer doing what I was doing before. I'm doing something else, but it's an extension of what I was doing before. So when I retired from Howard, my real job, I retired from DC Public School. That to me is the real work. Then I worked 19 years at Howard, which was also work, but the real job is DCPS. So and you go from that to the school, to the university. But everything I was doing then, I'm still doing one way or the other, because that's the way my mind works. That's the way my energies work. That's what, to me, that is a major concern. People communicating with each other and people getting this, being patient with each other and enjoying the difference. And so, and logging that, reminding us of that this does exist, that we have it. So my so-called retirement is these books and my membership in the Modern Language Association, which is not as satisfying now as it was when I was in university. It worked better, but their themes are not my themes. They're not the themes of the researcher in these kinds of civic, I would call it kind of a civic history that I'm doing, but it's still there because it feeds. And then the other thing is with the Language Association, with Women Educators, and that's the other book. And they are very, very, very smart, very, the national organization is. It's curious how that works out culturally and race-wise, but nonetheless, where there is genius, and you go toward
How
that.
does it work out? How does that work out?
It works out because of the reality of life in this country. It's an excellent organization, but even when it was first founded, it was not founded by Black, white, Chinese people. It was founded by white people for whites. But then in the 60s, that was changed. And so we have chapters all over the country. Now women are beginning to accept that history, to work with it. And because the larger issue is education, how we communicate in our communities with schools, how we can legislate, govern with our community leaders and government and resource finances, so take leadership responsibility. Those are the issues that all women have, all educators have. And this particular organization is very powerful in doing this, very excellent in doing this. So
say the name again, please.
this group, the group is called, the Greek name is Delta Kappa Gamma Society International for Women Educators. So that's what they do. But when it was founded back in 1929, so the idea was we have women who were being told, exactly, white women, of course, they were being told, you cannot wear your skirt at this length, and you cannot be found sitting in this ice cream parlor at such and such a time. And no need, you're expecting to be a principal anytime soon. The difference is in Washington, that was never the case. Washington women have always been in charge of their situation, and we had new experiences, but we didn't have anybody really with a thumb, because number one, women outnumbered all the educators in the first place. Men would come in and stay 1 or 2 years according to the record, and then they would go and become a preacher. But the instruct women, the only thing that women took too long, I thought they took too long to resist, is if you get married, you can't teach. Those were the things that they should never have accepted, but they did. And that showed their weakness. And so it takes time, historic time, to overcome this kind of stuff. We have so many things to overcome in this country, so many isms. And but nonetheless, we're not dealing with nearly the number of isms that a lot of other major cities are. We've always had excellent education, even when they were separate. We've had the best, very excellent teachers, very excellent programs, but the isms those are things that are bigger than teaching. Those are America. That's America. America's filled with isms, and that's what we have to deal with. That's our responsibility to deal with as educators and as educated people, as people of God. You have to deal with these isms.
You sound like you really grew up not worrying about those isms.
I don't, no.
And not feeling like it was a divided city. And that's just you.
That's maybe, and I can trace that back to my father. You see, that it never, we knew about it, of course, because when we were in Howard, we had groups going out and demonstrating and sitting at the restaurant, the camel tops, and insisting on service. Those are things to do, and the causes are real. But that's how you have different ways, of course, to react to circumstances. My way was to work with my students and make sure that they knew who they were and move forward. If somebody can call you a bad name or whatever and call you something, you know who you are. I'm not going to have you, just because somebody's called you a name, I'm not going to support picking up a cudgel and beating somebody to death. That's stupid. The important thing is that you know who you are and you act accordingly. Then you bring your brain, you bring your genius, and you bring your soul to the issue and work with it. And and once you do that, that issue 9 times, that piece of it will go away. It will always go away. But if we don't deal with these things, then they are always with us. We have a long way to go.
So 48 countries that you've traveled to, and probably going there, not being concerned about being different or anything other than you. What's your most memorable trip that you can talk to us about?
I don't know if I can answer that. I can, because my most memorable, what do you mean by memorable?
The one that you enjoyed the most.
Okay, what I enjoyed. I always like being in France because that feels like home. And I love Senegal because that feels like home. I wish I had more time when I was in England. I've been there a couple of times, but I never had enough time. I think that is a fascinating place. And if I can get out of here again anytime soon, I want to go to England, really spend maybe the whole summer or whatever along there, so that you can get more of the genius of those people, because they basically, you come up sometimes, you don't know them, you don't have a whole lot of, you just sort of can toss them off, but they're not to be tossed off. They're fascinating, brilliant people along different lines. But I like the country of France, and I love the Senegalese and their generosity, and that, even in Spain and China. China was not a good experience. What China did to me was I just got the feeling that there was not enough concern about people, their own people. And so I was there, and you felt threatened. And they celebrated that, coming through and pushing tourists out of this way and that way. And it was not a good environment, but then it was not that long after Tiananmen Square. So I think they may have still been reverberating from that themselves. But I think when I was in Senegal, that was really, really a good experience. That was, people are fun, and they dance, and they're smart. And they learn languages, like, you're struggling with something for 2 years, trying to think it, boom, just like that. When we go back over our records of translations and translators and interpreters, Africans are top of that list. That's their language. That's their soup. They thrive on it. That's how they have survived in their communities, where you have hundreds of languages going on. So they're very, very adept at language. And
were you a big proponent of travel for your students as well?
Yes, I am. But the question, what you run into are resources, number one. But I worked with the, I won't say I worked with, but I supported the International Studies Office program. So they would ask you, want to go with us, and you can act as an interpreter, or you have several of your students are involved, so you can be there, you can help, to keep them upbeat and so on. So I've done that, and that was just glorious. That was a great experience, because you had a purpose. And we were in Russia, and and we were standing, and so we were at the time at the perestroika, and all that massive change. It was the most incredible thing, because you could see the anger in the eyes of the old women. They were furious. They may not have known it, but their eyes were furious. And then the other people at the Iron Gate, where you go in and get all this, what do you call those things? Ant market, what do you call those markets? Anyway, we go to the market, and you see outside of those gates, people who had just before perestroika been very important. They'd been educators, they'd been leaders, they'd been travelers and tourists, and here they were vending those little dolls. And it was a crushing experience. It was really, really a bad experience.
And you had kids with you on this trip?
No, yes, there were kids. I didn't have them. There were teachers and adults, but our job was we were there with the kids, but the kids were not on that train, or not in the same train. We took a flight, and then we ended up in this train, and that was another experience. So anyway, they had the teachers and people, administrators and so on. They went along because we were establishing a program with Russian kids in there. We did it in Senegal and several other countries. I just went to about 2 or 3 of those. And that was exciting and wonderful thing, and the kids come back. But the thing that was so interesting was how many parents were scared to death to have their kids away from them like that. In one case, the parent traveled with the kid, and then she took her home. It was it's interesting, when people are afraid, and that's what I don't have. And maybe that's lack of wisdom, but that's what I learned from my father. This world is here for everybody, and unless there's a big gate blocking your coming in, saying nothing, you shall not pass this gate. Well, all right, forget it. There's nothing going on over there. Much is not going on someplace else too, but eventually that gate will come down. We have to. That's our responsibility as people on this planet, if we can keep. So it's been you get in my field as an educator, all of these things are always going on at the same time. You're looking at eminent domain, you're looking at threat, you're looking at peace, you're looking at funny dance, lovely day, you're looking at great food. It's all going on at the same time. And it makes for a very colorful lifestyle in terms of what you think, what you process.
What is the book that you're working on now?
What I'm finishing up is with the rest of the family. We're revising our family history. The first one was about 50, 60, 70 pages. The one that we're finishing up now will be close to 100, 200, because we're going in depth and looking at the same things you're asking me now, these kinds of issues. We want the people to, because we won't be doing another. We want the people to have more than a name and more than a cryptic photograph. We want them to have a story. Where we can get a story, that's what we have. So it's going to be, it's already, what has to happen now is just pulling these narratives together and making them live. And they're ready to do that. I just have to pull it all together, type it.
How many family members? How many family members?
It's probably, of those that we've identified, so it's over 200, because they're about, you have these big family things. And the other thing that's new that we're doing in this is not just me, I'm the editor, but we're going all the way back. We can't talk about our family just from the part that begins with the Negroes, because that's not the full story. We go all the way back. So wherever we can track that line back to England or to France, it's usually England or to Ireland. A lot of ours are Ireland, and even well enough that way. Then the parent personality comes through. You understand, if we leave them out, then it's hard to understand how this guy is building up this big thing with the land, with ownership and building churches and doing all kinds of stuff. Well, that was fed by that family's relationship or whatever was going on, whether it was slavery, whatever it was, when they were slaves or whatever, in the earlier days, 1600. So it goes back to 1600. And that's just explaining and putting that in a context, because it's that context that empowers them and reminds people who they are. You've got to know who the heck you are. And you won't have the full story, but you sure will know that what you not having it is not the story. It's just not the story. So, and as if my special little angel was on my side, she showed me this book by Stephen Ball, and he does all of that South Carolinian history of slavery. It's fantastic. And then you can see it just as clear as a sharp blade of a sword. And there they are. There's the story right there. But it's the Ball people in South Carolina. And then when you find out later on in that same book, in the introduction, thousands of Negroes can track back to that. And no matter what their feelings about it, they still can track back, because that experience is part of their experience and it shapes you. And that's what I mean by, I don't cotton standing around screaming about stuff. I think our job is to let people know who you are, give children or adults the information, and then they can work with it, understand, and look for more. Knowledge and information, to me, are they're just absolutely necessary. And when we don't have it, you're just a mess.
We have covered a lot of ground today. 80 years is a long time to cover, and I thank you for your candor. When you look back at this time, what do you think is your biggest blessing?
My biggest blessing is my mother and my father, because they were just two outrageous people, and they were free. They were free in their minds. They were free in their hearts. They were free in them. They did whatever it was they decided they were going to do. They didn't whisper. They didn't step aside. They claimed the life that was given them. They claimed it. To me, that's the most important thing. You can't live if you're going to say, well, they tell me I can't be there, or I must be, like some of the things my mother did, she would, but it didn't, but she couldn't, you sometimes you would she would say one thing, but the behavior would be something else. So you learn that. You learn this odd juxtaposition of stuff. But at the same time, all that, as I said, her mother and her father, they were both gentle people. They didn't hurt anybody. If they did any harm, they did it to themselves, but not to anybody else. It just was not in their mind to do that. And I think if when you're looking at your sources, and what they are the ones close to you, you have God. And I don't know what we would end it. I keep saying that because it is such an amazing thing that we try to live without them. But if you don't do that, you have your parents. I have a lot of parents are no good whatsoever, but I had two remarkable parents. And because of that thing, be your own, juice. Do your, claim your space. And that doesn't mean you've got to bully and raise sand. You just have to claim your space and not be afraid, because that's where God is. You are not afraid. You can't, fear is not, if you're afraid, then you're saying, well, as we say in church, God is unable, that's not possible. So you just walk, do your thing, be good, sing well, shut up when they ask you to shut up.
And what blessing do you pray for Asbury?
I pray that it continue on that corner. That's, to me, it's absolutely necessary. It's worth anything we can do. I think it's not just about us. It's about a larger need or calling or reminder. It's been there. It was there with nothing. As Marjorie says, she says, paying for that church with their nickels and dimes, so, and then even with the nickels and dimes, it's still there, and their vision for the church was good, big, and they moved fast with the beautiful stained glass windows and that beautiful limestone and all it's as I said, a resting place for people coming up from whatever they're coming for, because they do that. That to me is, I don't want Asbury to lose that corner no matter what. I don't want anybody to think or to even work like they're thinking about saying, well, we're going to go to Maryland and become a 4,000, 5,000 year this person monster. That's not what this is all about. So you have to stay there. You have to be a ministry. We have to sacrifice and not lose who we are. See, there's always a risk in people, especially in churches, which are like people. You start feeling that you're losing ground. We got to change. Well, no, you can grow, but the church is there, and everybody there came to the church as it was. So what we have to do is understand that and work the church and let it be what it is supposed to be, just as we have to do the same thing for ourselves. And this is 184 years, 185 years. The choir is as old as the church, and it is the same church. And this is a third building. First building was something like not a barn, but was something federal style, when the windows, they had that. Then we had this church, but just the midsection. So even that has been very modest. No major dump the whole thing and start all over again. This is the blessing. This is the gift for which we are responsible. I think most of us in the church look at that this is a charge. We have a hymn for that, the charge to keep have I. And so that's the charge. And it's not just the building, but this is a place. It's a resting place, a place to understand, to find acceptance, to be at peace, and to move on and do good work.
And what about for the District of Columbia?
What is its role?
What blessings would you want for your native town?
For Washington, I think we are experiencing great blessings right now. I think I am very, very impressed with the spirit and courage of the mayor and how articulate she is about that. Out right front, stay She's remarkable. I think that is very, very important. And I think that it has been a major blessing. Washington, I want to see our schools, and I want to see some kind of effort to pull these youngsters back together, and so that they can be youngsters, because right now they're just old men and women. They're just so out of whack. It scares me. And I don't even know who's working on it, but they're the youth. It's just like our youth. If they're not there, then you can't impact them, and you can't engage them in growth and development and the maintenance of the institutions and schools and so on that are necessary to maintain. That's my deepest problem in my own mind. It's the youth. I don't know where they're going, and I don't see. I'm not creative enough to see where they might be doing better. What would it take to bring out real good people out of that? But I know that somehow that's what we're supposed to be doing, trying to do. But it takes special people who have big hearts, people who understand, who can look into children and see the child there and pull them out. The kind of thing we do in language as well. Can you do that with that kid? And that's not everybody. That's not everybody. So I don't know how you do that, but those are my, I'm grateful for the church. And it's being there in the dead center of the city, on the highest, as Reverend Mills says, this is the most active telephone zone, not zip code zone in the country. 2000, what, 10 or 10 or whatever it is, 11, 01, 02, we're in whatever. More people, active. I don't pay attention to stuff like this. But anyway, but that zone, and then the other troubling zone, way out there in Southeast Washington, where people, we were running when we were doing these student travel abroad things. You're finding kids who had never been out of that zip code, never been out of Anacostia, never crossed the river. What kind of foolishness is that? What kind of thing is that? And there's still situations like that. And I've been on jury duty. And the last one I swore, I said, I will not do another jury duty, no matter what. They come and get me. Because all I saw was the waste of our youth doing the most ridiculous stuff and no one having an answer to curb it. Ridiculous stuff, devastating stuff. And they're 13, 14, 15 years old, brilliant. Their minds are still in place until they get the drug. They had parents or somebody who tried, the teachers, not parents, because parents are teachers trying to bring them along. You can see evidence of that. They were even articulate. They could think, they could plan, they could dress up, but they've thrown away their souls. They've thrown away their privacy. They've thrown away their power of themselves. They've thrown away the possibility of peace. I don't even know if they knew of it, but it was totally inconsistent with what you were seeing there in the jury room. I think it's going to probably take more than just somebody organized. I think it's going to take something more from outside of us to get that straightened out. I don't know what, but those are the tragedies of this life, the children, I think, in Washington.
From God.
It has to come from God. It has to. And he just seems to like to work through his folks. But my question is, where are your folks? It's just it's so heartbreaking. It made me sign, guys. I was ready to take a fine because I wasn't going to sit on another, because all they do is just throw them back out there, and dodge the bullet. You can just watch them, all these little people in their little gray suits and their little shields, and they're dodging the bullet, and they're not. Nobody's really, the people who are trained to deal with it and who have been hired to deal with it, they're not. And it takes a kind of leadership and creativity that he's probably still waiting for. He's still waiting for it. And I'm hoping it will come. I don't think it may not be here yet, but when it gets here, maybe it'll be the turning point. But right now, we don't seem to have the genius to deal with the issues.
Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about?
I don't think so. Not really. I just was It goes all the way back to Stewart. When I went there my first year, somebody said, this school is a best kept secret. And that's what it was. And for me to have been placed there as a brand new teacher, didn't know one thing and the other, didn't have, I never had much patience with kids anyway. It was a divine place. I love them, I miss them. When and they moved me, because I didn't apply for it. They moved me to Wilson. Boy, I'm telling you, because I had this Will Stewart, this beautiful lab. They could do anything I wanted it to do. One of the few in the city. They put one in that school, and I had a wonderful lab. And then I had all these fabulous kids who are sprightly, all of them, every last one, the Chinese, the Negroes, the whites. They were lively and colorful, and they were just about as cute as they could be. And then when that Vietnam War came up, they were taking some of those little boys that were hardly bigger than grasshoppers, and they were going into the military and given 3 months training. And in many cases, before that 3 month period was over, right after it was over, you're getting reports, so-and-so is dead, so-and-so is dead. That's Stewart. Stewart is bittersweet, you know, those poor little children, but they were wonderful. They were wonderful, wonderful children. They were musical, and we had this Alice Morse, incredible woman. She really, to me, represents the best of what we are trying to do. Alice Morse, the principal, and Alice Morse, who's assistant principal, and Edna Bernstein, her name was not Edna, but I can't remember her first name. They were the people in place when 1950, when we had the closing out of segregated schools. So they were still in place, but they were excellent leaders. But you can tell by what they were doing and what they had done, how effective they had been. But Alice Morse was beyond belief. She was theater. She had training in theater out of Vermont. So I can't think of that school where she was. And we had the little stage like that. She would not be frustrated by anything. See, there are lessons learned and everything. There's an opportunity to see anything. If you got this little stage at Stewart, because it was a little school, little stage, but she's mounting the big plays. If I don't have any space on the side, I'm going to go up. Her stages will go to the ceiling. She could get her sets. They would build her sets, and they would go right up to the ceiling. You see these kids and teachers, because they always had them mixed, the teachers and students and any kind of kid. Because what she was concerned, her theme was whether the show must go on, and whatever that took. So when they were doing what's that story where the man, what's the thing? Oh, I can't think of anything. So it's crazy. But anyway, the Christmas story of I'm so bad off, pitiful. The man wakes up has all these bad dreams, and he's getting ready to go to hell. But they finally, what's the name of that story?
A Wonderful Life?
No, I wish my sisters were here, because they know stuff. I'm lost. But anyway, the guy had all the chains. He was dragging his chains.
Oh, Scrooge.
You're good. That's Scrooge. And you can see Alice Morse. She's short and she was pippy. She's walking all around the school. You think she's patrolling, but when she was really she's looking for her Scrooge. she was looking for who was going to be the queen. And this thing was always in her head. She was always doing theater. And whoever she saw that was her Scrooge, that person became Scrooge. And she got this little old bad boy, not Scrooge, the man with the chains. She got the man
Jacob Marley.
Yeah, Jacob Marley. There he is. There's Jacob. She loaded that fella down, and he played the role. He was a big old bad boy. But when she put those chains on him and put him on center stage, and she dragged those chains up, these are the people. These are the people who can change your soul and change your mind and make you keep moving, because that's all they can do. They do it. And they don't use phony, fake parameters. It's their soul that's coming out, and it's their will and their vision. And that's how she was. She had
And that's what you modeled as a young teacher. Is that what you modeled as well?
I think so. I'm not, that's what I did, but I don't think I was all that exciting about it, but that's who I was. I couldn't, you can't be somebody today and then turn around and be somebody else tomorrow. They'll call you on that, So, but yes, I believe that that's what she was. She was a theater person in her heart, but also she was a teacher, and so in her thesis, the way I don't think it was a political thing. It was just the way it is. She was an actress. She had been an actress in New York, and she studied theater and so on. And when she was at Stewart, she came there in 1930 something, so it was fully white and all that kind of stuff. Then when we had the integration, she was still there doing what she did. She got her Marley. She got her, what's the guy's name? Scrooge.
She got her Tiny Tim.
She got a Tiny Tim. She didn't have to go on. She didn't take it out of the school. She just had them people build. They just build it straight up, and they would all this stairwells, incredible. But she's theater, so those kinds of things are what you do. You don't. It doesn't. Nobody tells your stage is too narrow. Somebody says no, these kids are too bad. No, this teacher's too proper. When she finished with them, she had first class show. She did it every year. But at the same time, she did theater at the YWCA on K Street. She was fabulous. And when she retired from Stewart. She's been in teaching all over, whatever time she had in Washington. It was at Stewart, and she had been a professional artist in New York part of the time. But what she brought to Stewart in its entirety. It was
of
just
your positions
incredible.
that you held. Is there a particular position that you most want to be associated with?
No, because I only have. I don't think so. I'm not really, because
Teaching junior high school, teaching high school, college, any of those stick out more than another?
I've always had, since the beginning, for some peculiar reason, I had the same objective. So I wanted the kids to communicate. I wanted to use the language. I wanted to see that demonstrated so that we could see the students doing it. Then it would get the teachers to do it. As a matter of fact, it did happen sometimes. Matter of fact, it happened more than once. I would get, I had, when I was at Stewart, and we talked about this before, creating the model for how you learn language before we actually had that big national model. And then I would hear from teachers who were very good, top of the line teachers. They would say, I got a question, how do you get your kids to talk? And they couldn't have asked me a better question. How do you get your kids? Because when they left Stewart, they would go to Wilson, or they go to Woodruff, what's that school there? Woodson, they go to Woodson, whatever. So a teacher at Wilson asked me, well, how did you get your kids to talk and to speak French? And that to me wasn't, that's all I needed. That was a perfect kind of question, because it said that what we were doing in Stewart, they took it with them, they carried it, and they put it on the table in their new school, and they thrived. They just had that. The other thing that I was very impressed with, not impressed, I was very moved by, I guess, was the boys coming back from Vietnam, and they're scrambled. And what they did is they went to their teachers, and I had some come, and they'd come in there after school, and they would talk, and you sit down, and you would talk. You don't just, sometimes they're going 4 hours. You're sitting there talking to these guys, these kids, for 4 hours. They're so balled up. You see, the job is so much bigger than our content. The content is a platform, and it has especially in languages, if they're being taught, it's a perfect platform to reach kids and to do it, because you take them out of themselves, and they're learning another means of communication, and they see themselves doing that. It's a whole different thing. But when they came in there all psychologically and busted up and disappointed, whatever, and they would just sit there and they would talk, and I would sit there and they would talk, and they would show me their pictures standing next to a tank, and all that kind of stuff. And every now and then you get a message that so-and-so was killed in that daggone war. It was for real. It was, you see, that's what I'm talking about. So I don't have a favorite school or favorite anything. It's the work that is whatever that is. That is whatever it is, whenever it is, wherever it is. And it has no special place. It's the entirety. Everything I do is related to that, even these little crazy books.
These books are excellent books, and I think that is a marvelous place. We'll end where we began. Thank you so much. Thank you for your lifetime experiences, and thank you for sharing them with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for talking to me. Make sure you cut out everything that's foolishness. Yeah? Just cut it out.
We'll take care of that. Thank you so much.